This is how I turned this boring old Nintendo Switch OLED into a brand new atomic purple transparent version. This shell was sent to me free of charge from Extreme Rate. I'll leave their links down in the description below. This is the Nintendo Switch that I'm going to be using today. I bought this thing brand new and I got it in the white version because it was about £40 cheaper, and this shell swap is going to look way better than any Nintendo version anyway, so I figured I might as well get the cheap one. Opening up the Extreme Rate box, we can see we get the bottom bezel that covers the USB-C charging port and the vents at the bottom of the console. We have the kickstand, the new and improved OLED version. We have the backplate for the console. This has got to be my favourite part of this whole shell swap. I think it looks really cool seeing the internals of the console. We also have an instruction manual that tells us we have a 6-month warranty, so Extreme Rate are very confident in the quality of their products. Anything that goes wrong, it will be replaced and fixed by them. Now, removing this little plastic piece, we can reveal the buttons. They include some coloured ones. These aren't personally for me, so I'm going to be using the original black ones in this video. We then have some atomic purple clear buttons, which we can use if we like to. These come on a little plastic sheet, but what you need to do is just simply cut them off this piece of plastic to access the buttons properly. We then have 2 included screwdrivers. These are Tri-Wing and Phillips drivers. I'm going to be using my own today, but I think it's really cool that Extreme Rate provide everything you need to do this kit. We then have some other pieces for the backplate, including the game cart slot. We're going to be using these today. And then we have the left Joycon pieces. The Joycons are made out of 3 pieces, so we're going to be needing all 3 of these today. So using my iFixit screwdriver kit, we're going to begin disassembling the console. We're first using the Phillips driver to remove the screws on the bottom, top and sides of the console. Now, the bottom piece that comes with this shell is particularly difficult to install. It requires pretty much a full disassembly of the console. Now, I'm going to do it in this video, but you can use the chapters on this video down below to skip if you don't want to do this part. It includes fully removing the motherboard from the console, so if you're not as confident with modifying your console, then you can stick to just the backplate and the Joy-Cons, which are much easier. My console has been modified before, which is why you see the blue tape, linked in the description below if you want to see that video. What I'm doing here is removing the metal shield of the console in order to access the motherboard. We need to fully disconnect the battery and also remove the heatsink of the console. This is held in by 3 screws and some adhesive at the top vent. Then there are lots of screws to remove the motherboard. Some of these need to be removed on external parts such as the fan, but some of these are also holding the motherboard down to the chassis. Every time the heatsink is removed, we need to apply some new thermal paste, so we're going to go ahead and clean up the old stuff. Next, I'm removing ribbon cables. Be very careful with this screen ribbon cable right here. The port on it is very fragile and very easy to break. Once all that's removed, we can go ahead and remove the motherboard from the console. This gives us full access to the bottom piece, which contains the vents and the hole for the USB-C charging port. There are 2 screws to hold this in, and then it simply just comes out with a little bit of force. We also need to install the new rubber feet onto this piece. Now we'll fit the new piece with the vents and the rubber feet and screw it down like we did before. And there we go. This is definitely the hardest piece to install just because of how much you have to disassemble things, but I'd say if you have some experience with modifying consoles, you should be fine with this. And now for reassembly, putting back in all the screws and ribbon cables into the console. I wish this part was easier to remove, but I'm also glad it's there as an option if you want to do it. Extreme Rate of course provides all the parts needed to do this, but that doesn't mean you have to do this on your console. As we remove the heatsink, we need to make sure to apply some fresh thermal paste. This involves cleaning all the old paste off of the heatsink and applying some new paste. I'm using a bit of MX4 from Arctic. Then we need to install the SD card slot and the game card slot, which are on one little PCB. This simply just clips back into the console with a bit of pressure and then is held in with one screw. Next I'm removing the antennas off of the metal shield. Now because I want to be able to view the motherboard of the console from the outside of the shell, I'm not actually going to be putting this metal shield back on the console. This metal shield actually has nothing to do with thermals, although there is a little bit of paste on there for some extra security. This is actually an RF shield, so it's fine to remove. You can see here that both the antennas screw directly onto the console without the need of that metal shield, using the same screws. This does mean that we have to route the wires of the console a little bit differently. I used some blue electrical tape to tape mine down onto the battery and plugged it in as usual. Next we need to install the backplate onto the console and transfer some things from the old shell onto the new one. The most difficult part of this for me was removing and installing the hinges onto the new shell. I had some problems with screws not properly going in, but this could have just been a skill-based issue. There are some plastic pieces that need to be removed to expose the metal hinges. We also need to remove the power button from the console as we need that rubber membrane. Then we remove the game port slot from the old housing. We need this little plastic clip for the new one. Then we also need to remove the vents from the old backplate as we need these for the new shell as well. The hinges are held in with 2 screws, so we're going to go ahead and remove those, and then transplant them over to the new purple backplate and screw them in. Once the hinges are successfully installed, we then need to install the game port slot using the old black tab from the backplate. We simply just assemble this and then hold it in with one screw. Then we also need to screw in the vents to the bottom of the console and align the power button correctly, and then we can simply just put the backplate back on and screw it in. This is definitely my favourite part of this whole modification. I really love being able to see the internals of the console, like the battery and the motherboard. The hinge works just like it did before, and everything is like stock. But of course this time we have an atomic purple shell. Next we're going to move on to the Joy-Cons. We're going to start with the right Joy-Con because this one's a lot more difficult to do. We're going to start by removing the 4 tri-ring screws on the back of the Joy-Con and removing the shell. Then we switch over to the Phillips driver and remove the screw that holds in the Joy-Con rail. The Joy-Con release button is on this piece, so make sure not to lose it. Then there are more silver and gold screws inside to remove the battery holder. Now the reason this Joy-Con is a bit more difficult is because there is just more pieces. There's a little infrared thing at the bottom, and also the flex cable for some reason for the trigger is a lot shorter, meaning when we reassemble it we have to kind of do it in different stages. Be really careful you don't tear that cable. Then we remove the vibration motor and the IR piece, and also remove some screws from the board. Then we can go ahead and remove the whole assembly and transfer what we want over to the new shell. Like I said earlier, I'm going to be using the same black buttons, so I'm going to transfer these over. We also need to remember to transfer the NFC board over to the new shell. This is responsible for NFC features such as amiibos in games. Then I'm installing my new buttons into the purple shell along with the button membranes. Once the buttons are in, we can install the PCB of the Joy-Con back into the new shell. This part's a little bit fiddly because sometimes the buttons can move as you're doing this, so you might need to take it in and out a few times to get it right. Once the buttons are secure, we can then screw down the board and reassemble it just how we disassembled it, plugging in all the flex cables and screwing on the back piece for the Joy-Con. And there we go, that is the right Joy-Con complete. It completely matches the backplate and looks really good. Now it's just important to test all the buttons. Let's move on to the left Joy-Con. Luckily this one is a lot easier to install and it just has less pieces overall. That trigger flex cable is also a lot longer, which makes this way easier. Just like the right Joy-Con, we need to remove the back piece and then remove the Joy-Con rail from the shell. Now it's just completely disassembling the Joy-Cons, removing all of the screws in sight and removing the flex cables as well. As you can see, this one does have a vibration motor, but it doesn't have the IR piece and it doesn't have the NFC chip, so this one's a lot easier to do. You want to remove the screws holding the board down, and then we can pull it out and transfer it into the new purple shell. First, remembering to install all of the old buttons into the new shell, or whichever one you picked. Let me know in the comments down below which buttons you used for your build. Then we can reseat the PCB and screw everything back down. We also need to install the old rail into the new purple back piece. Then we reseat and plug in the battery and put on the back piece, and then reinstall the 4 tri-wing screws to close up the Joy-Cons. And there we go, we have our fully modified atomic purple transparent Nintendo Switch OLED. Okay, so that's about it for today's video. We now have a fully transparent Nintendo Switch OLED. I really like how this shell turned out, and in all honesty, it wasn't even that difficult to install. I mean, I've done Switches before, like I have this V2 version, which I did a while ago, so I do have some experience, but I'd say I've probably done about 4 shell swaps on the Switches. The OLED is definitely a harder install. The Joy-Cons are exactly the same. They work on any console, V1, V2, or OLED, so those aren't going to be any different. I'd say the difficult part for me was this bottom bezel and also the kickstand. Some of the screws on the hinges just refused to go in for me. This is definitely not an issue which is on extreme rate. I think, to be fair, I probably just mixed some of the screws up. I've never done an OLED before, this was my first console, and I'm really happy with how it turned out. Now, Extreme Rate do have these shells available on their website, and they have given me a nice 10% discount code to give to you guys. I would just say the code, but roll the clip. So yeah, you can use code TMS for 10% off everything on the Extreme Rate website. You get yourself a nice little discount, and I also get a nice little commission, which helps me make videos like this more often. Big thanks to Extreme Rate for sending out this shell. I'm really happy with how it turned out, and I'll definitely be doing more Joy-Con videos soon. So that is it for this video. If you did enjoy it, then check out my Nintendo Switch playlist. I have lots of other modding content on the console. If you enjoyed this video, then leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.